Hello everyone, Desert Gardener here, and today I'm going to be going over my almost 1 year long study to find out whether it's a good idea to plant your tomatoes deep. So this is actually going to be part 2 of me talking about this subject. Now in part 1, I went over what planting deep was, what are all the supposed benefits, and all the reasons why I thought it was a bad idea. Now in this video, I'm just going to be going over the results. Now if you plant tomatoes, I definitely recommend you watching both. It really doesn't matter what order you watch them in, but I'll put the link to the first one down below and at the end. I don't want to rehash all that information. In this one, I'm just going to be going over the results. So the test. How did I do it? So first off, I planted all my seeds indoors under grow lights on February 1st. On April 15th, I chose 15 tomato plants and I planted them in the garden. Now the first 5, I planted them nice and deep, just like I talked about in the first video. The second 5, I'm planted what I'm going to be calling semi-deep, so about 2 to 3 inches below soil level. And the last 5, I planted them right at soil level, so not deep at all. And to try to make the test as even as fair as possible, in each of the 3 sections, I had 3 cherry tomatoes, 1 Ace 55, and 1 Cherokee Purple. So then I just simply went out into the garden and began recording and videoing what I saw. Now my plan was just to show you that video, but to be honest, it was kind of long and boring and the camera was kind of shaky. So I thought I'd save both of us a lot of trouble, and I'm just going to go over the results and tell you what I saw. So on May 15th, I went out to see which was the tallest tomato. And the 2 tallest ones were ones that were both planted at soil level. Now all 15 were flowering. So I missed which one flowered first, but so far they're all doing pretty well. Then on May 25th, I went out again and I checked each of the different tomato types. Now the tallest cherry tomato was one of the 3 that were planted at soil level. The tallest Ace 55 was again one that was planted right at soil level, and the tallest of the 3 Cherokee Purples was again one that was planted right at soil level. So the soil level ones are really doing well at this point. So then on June 1st, I went out and I saw my very first tomatoes. Now the 5 that were planted deep had a total of 1 tomato. The 5 that were planted semi-deep had a total of 8 tomatoes. And the 5 that were planted at soil level had a total of 1 tomato. So the semi-deep are catching up here. So then on June 9th, I went out again because I saw my first ripe tomato. And that was a cherry tomato that was on one of the ones that were planted at soil level. And then I waited to see how long it took for that 1 cherry tomato that was on the cherry tomato plant that was planted deep. And it wasn't until June 21st, so quite a bit later, before the planted deep tomato had finally ripened. So at this point, I started harvesting and I kept track of every tomato I harvested from every plant and which section it was in to know exactly how many. Now to make this easy, I'm just going to combine them into the sections. Out of the 5 that were planted deep, they produced a total of 70 tomatoes by August 25th. That's when I stopped counting. The semi-deep section had a total of 90 tomatoes, and the ones that were planted at soil level, 140 tomatoes. So literally double the amount of tomatoes that were produced by the ones that were planted deep. And this surprised even me. To be honest, I was expecting it to be kind of similar, plus or minus something that you might just consider margin of error. And I was going to say, well, see, if planting your tomato plants is so deep is so beneficial, how come they didn't outperform the ones that weren't planted deep? But here, the differences were huge. The ones that were planted at soil level had double the amount of tomatoes. So I think we're definitely going to call this myth busted. Planting your tomatoes deep is not a good idea. There is no benefit to it at all. Now, if you want to know the exact reasons why, I went over all that in the first video, and I'll be linking to that down below and at the end. I definitely recommend watching both of them. I don't want to rehash all that here. Now, some people might say, well, it's hard to compare plants. They're all going to be different, you know, like people. They're not clones. Well, sure, that's true. I can take 2 tomato seeds from the exact same tomato, plant them side by side, treat them exactly the same, and one's going to be a little different than the other. That's going to be expected. But here, the differences were just so different that it's way more than just a statistical anomaly. Plus, I'm not the only person who's done this test. I've talked in the first video about another person who did a similar test and got similar results. So more and more people, I think, are starting to notice that this is not a good idea, despite how common it is. Now, just a little side note, these aren't the only tomato plants I planted this year. I plant about 30 tomatoes every year. So 15 were part of this test. Another 15 were planted in a completely different part of the garden, and I didn't consider them part of this test at all. Now, normally what happens is I'll get way more tomatoes than I can possibly eat, and I start giving them to my mother, and she makes salsa and I make salsa, and it all works out pretty well. But this year, because all the other tomato plants were all planted at soil level, and I got so many more tomato plants, or tomatoes, than I was used to, that I was having difficulty even giving them away. I was giving them to friends and family and coworkers, even gave a bunch to the people on my roller derby team. I was having trouble giving them all away. So many that I actually had to start selling the extras on Facebook Marketplace. Now, I didn't keep track of exactly how many there were or how many I produced last year, but just planting at soil level just seems to be so much more beneficial that I am going to be planting at soil level from now on. So I hope you got something out of this. It was very time consuming and took a lot of work, so if you found it even mildly interesting, please hit that like button. It really helps out. And if you want to see more videos like this, hit the subscribe button. And my next video, I'm already working on it. I'm going to be going over 2 different ways that you can fix your Jumpstart grow lights. All right? Hope to see you then.